I gave myself a little introduction there while I was muted. Apologies there. So I'll say again, welcome everybody. I'm just going to give it another moment or so here as people are getting themselves logged in. Sends out a quick notification when the webinar starts. So I just want to make sure everybody's got a chance to get themselves connected. Thanks again for joining us for another webinar here today. If anybody has been on our webinars before, you'll know that there's no audio options for you during the webinar, but there is a chat module, so you can ask any questions that you may have throughout the webinar. If I'm not able to answer them as we go through, or if they're not answered just with the topics as we proceed through today's webinar, I'll attempt to follow up with everyone. But we also have a great support team ready to take your questions as well, and they can be reached by phone, by live chat, and by email. Phone and live chat is available Monday to Friday, 8 to 8 Eastern Standard Time. Email you can do anytime. And when you send an email to goallinesupport@stacksports.com, you'll automatically receive an auto reply with a case number. And you can use that case to track your questions or your issues as you go through. So there's a little bit of that housekeeping. So today's topic is really, I think it's one that hopefully is really useful to everybody here. We're going to talk about coaches and managers. So a lot of our webinar series to date has been focused just on general use of goal line and not really from the perspective of any specific type of administrator. So I did think that it was important to outline sort of what coaches and managers, and I'm going to kind of lump them together, and I may say just coaches or just managers, when really we're talking about bench staff, team staff, people who are responsible for managing that team. So whether you're a coach or a manager or whatever other title you may have, if you're part of that coaching staff, that's sort of who we're referring to. We're going to talk about some things that coaches and managers specifically wouldn't do, but that are important for the association or the organization in general in order to set everybody up for success. As we know, coaches and managers are super important to your organization. A lot of times, I would say most of the time, especially in my experience, they're volunteer positions. And so people are volunteering their time and they want to be able to use these tools that are going to be nice and simple to use and that help get their day-to-day done so that they can focus more on, the fun stuff like practice plans and emails to parents and things like that from the manager's perspective. So we're going to talk about the recommended permissions for coaches and managers that essentially, if you are on this today because you are a coach and manager, some of these things may be notes that you want to take to your association to say, hey, I think if I had this permission in goal line, it would make my life easier, or maybe vice versa. Maybe you're doing something that maybe is better to be done at the association level. So we're going to be talking about the recommended permissions. Keep in mind, these are just recommendations, and your association may make different choices when it comes to those things. We're going to talk about how you manage a team roster and the various ways that you can get your roster available to you. We'll talk about how you communicate with your team once you have a roster, scheduling practices and games, and reporting games. So the recommended permissions, we'll dive right in there. In a previous webinar, I can't recall exactly the date. I should have probably written that down. But we did do a really good deep dive into all of the website admin permissions that can be granted at either the association level, which would be the master menu, or league level or team level permissions. So that would be a really great one to check out if you have questions or just want to know more about other specific permissions that are available in the granular permission system. Today, we're going to focus specifically just on the ones that affect coaches and managers and sort of the recommendation and why they're recommended. Another note here that's really kind of important to understand is that all different organizations are going to have different requirements of coaches and managers. And so this is going to depend a lot on how your organization is managed from the top to the bottom. Some organizations may not grant any permissions at all to coaches and managers, and they kind of do it all for you, while others might grant a lot of permissions and have coaches and managers really doing the bulk of the day-to-day work. And so you might fall somewhere somewhere in between or somewhere on that spectrum of, you know, having some permissions but not full permissions and that kind of thing. What today I'm going to go through is sort of the most popular example of how a coach or manager would be using Goalline, and touch on how different organization policies might affect what permission you would grant or not grant. So my assumptions here, and as I'm going to log myself in, as usual, I'm going to log myself in using the admin login up here, but of course I'm just going to switch tabs and go right into the admin control panel here. At my master menu, we want to start here because this is where we grant access. So I'm going to click on people, and then I'm going to find the manage website admins option, which is going to be in the settings subsection. So we'll start here, and when you're adding or editing an administrator, you'll notice that there's either a league type or a team type. So we're really focused today just on our team type administrator. So I'll edit Adam here, and just take a look here. When we add an administrator, the permissions are going to be set up as association wide, so master menu options. Then because we have a team administrator, we get into team specific, and we can see teams. So I can grant permissions on a per team basis, and these are the ones that we're going to focus on here. The example that we'll go through is a coach who has this sort of typical list of responsibilities of updating their rosters for jersey positions and jersey numbers and positions, communicating with your team through news or email, collecting team attendance data, updating practices, things like canceling or adding a practice, and some other kind of fun stuff that we'll talk about when it comes to practices, and reporting games. There may be other permissions as well that you might need if you're supposed to add games and that kind of thing, but we'll take a look through these specific permissions. Excuse me. When granting your permissions to coaches and managers with all of those responsibilities, the following permissions here. So we're going to look at team admin tools here. This is really where most of this is going to focus, but there's going to be some in other areas. Because this is sideways, it's a little hard to read, but I'll just demonstrate here. You can use Control F. I'm a PC person. I'm sure there's something very similar on a Mac using Command. But if I want to look for a certain thing, if I want, where are my permissions related to players, I can use Control F here, and it does read that text. So if you're really having trouble, the other thing that I do a lot is I maximize my screen, and I kind of increase the size of my screen sometimes just to take a closer look at these things. So we'll do that for the purpose of the webinar here, so we can see easily what we're granting. So our rep teams are going to be listed here as the team name, and I can grant all permissions, or we can get granular. If you have league teams, you're going to see them look like this, because there are teams that belong to all of these divisions. And so if I want to grant permissions to a team that belongs to the Women's Hurricane Inlet League, I would click on that league to see the teams in there and grant those team-based permissions in here. So whether you have rep teams or league teams, you can grant these kind of permissions as needed, and you can grant permissions to multiple teams to the same administrator by doing this. So we're going to focus just generally right now on our rep teams here. I want to give the permission to, if I need to be able to update my roster, I absolutely need permission to at least view and edit my team roster. View edit team rosters lets me view my roster, and it lets me edit the people on it for their jersey number, their position, their other personal information, and it also allows me to release players from my team. But being able to view and edit my team roster does not allow me to add players to my roster. If I'm also supposed to be able to add players to my roster, then I need the permission to add or edit players. If I have that permission, I don't necessarily need both. It's not a problem to grant both of these permissions, but if I can do anything to my roster, I can add players, I can edit players, I can release players. I can just have this permission, and it allows me to do all of those things. Having both, again, not an issue. Only having view edit team roster does not allow me to add players to my team. The next permission that you want to make sure you provide, if you want the coach to be able to manage it, is, of course, team attendance. So viewing and editing team attendance is a permission here. So you want to grant this permission, and we're going to take a deeper look at how you're going to use that tool. But this permission allows the coach or manager to set up their team attendance options and then view the results of team attendance as it comes into them. Being able to add or edit practices and creating games, these kind of things are really up to individual organizations. So we'll talk about it because what I often see is that you have permission to add or edit practices so that you can change practice details if you need to, so that you can add an additional practice if you need to, but not necessarily having that permission for games. There are reasons why associations may choose not to give you the ability to add practices at all. And a lot of times it's going to come down to how does your organization manage your venue allocation. So if we use hockey, for example, you only have so much ice time allocated to your association, and that ice time needs to be distributed amongst all of the teams and leagues that you manage. So same thing goes for soccer. You only have so many field bookings and things like that. If you need to control that aspect of your organization really specifically, then you probably don't want to grant permission to add, edit practices or games to your coaches and team managers. You'll probably want somebody in your organization who has that responsibility, kind of wears that hat when they're doing their work for your association. So keep that in mind, that if you're a coach logged in and you can't do these things regarding practices, it's probably because of how your organization is managing and allocating the venue time that you have available. I'm going to try to use the word venue in place of like rink and field or court, but just know that that's what I'm talking about whenever I say venues here. Another one related to that is going to be trading and claiming venue time. It may be that you have the ability to trade or claim venue time without the ability to actually add or edit practices. So what this would do is allow you to claim something that's already been made available, or take your own practice and make it available for someone else to claim. The use case here is that your team can't make it, or maybe you got invited to play an exhibition game instead, and you want to get rid of your practice time because you're going to go to someone else's venue. That's how you would use the trade and claim venue time. So it could be possible that you have that available where you can claim practice times, but not create a game or a practice just from scratch. Other scheduling permissions would kind of fall under that same category of you may or may not be able to, and it really depends on your organization. That would be the create game and the upload schedule file. If you are allowed to add practices, I generally recommend that you have the ability to upload a schedule file, but there is a little bit of an unknown risk in there because uploading a schedule file can include games or practices. And so you could, if you have the ability to upload a schedule file, you can upload games and practices, even if you're only supposed to use it for practices. So the goal line system's not going to stop you from creating games through an upload if you have permission to do the upload. So these are just some of the reasons why your organization may be very careful and kind of restrictive with the way that they provide permissions to you. Reporting game stats is one that you probably need. This is going to be one of the most popular ones, and it's not uncommon at all to have permissions that sort of look like this for a team administrator, who all you can do is view your roster, view team attendance, and report game scores. And maybe you don't have access to any of the other tools, including communication tools, just based on how your association has chosen to set that up for you. Reporting game stats is required if you are supposed to print game sheets and if you are supposed to report the game score for either your home games or games that you were the winning team. However, your league and your association distributes the responsibility of reporting the game score. If you need to report a score at any time for your team, then you need to have this permission. When this is granted as a team-based permission, you are able to report a game score for any game that you were involved in, even if you were the visiting team. And so just keep in mind that even though you may see the game to report, it might not be your job to report it. Another thing that you may run into when you do have permission to report game scores is that at the league level or at the association level, they can lock game scores once they have been reported. And so if that game score has been locked, you're not going to be able to edit or report that game a second time or reset it. You would have to have somebody unlock that game. The use case there would be if there's a mistake made, if you know, the wrong number of goals or the wrong person was attributed a yellow card, or you know, whatever may have happened on that game report. If there's corrections to be made and it's locked, you will have to go to someone in your association that has permission to unlock and fix up that game, and then or you know, just unlock it so that you can make the corrections, and then they would lock it again once that's been once that has been verified. So related to your day-to-day activity that you kind of have to do, these are the 3 permissions that are really kind of necessary there. Your association may be granting you schedule tools, and they may also grant you communication tools. And honestly, I don't see a problem with granting permission to any of these communication tools at the team level. The difference in whether you get them or not, especially things like news articles and web pages and photo galleries, is that these are displayed on the public side of the website along with the rest of your team menu. If your organization doesn't want any additional content to be available on the team menus on the public side of the website, they may not be providing you with these permissions, but it would generally be recommended that they give you the ability to send email announcements, you know, and possibly create that photo gallery and upload and remove files. Uploading and removing files really, if you upload a file to your team menu, it can be seen by administrators who have access to the master menu. You won't have access to files that are added at the master menu if this is your only permission. The purpose of uploading a file is so that you could include it as an attachment in something like an email or a web page that you're creating, that you want people to be able to click on and download that file to their computer. So that's what you might be having as permissions when it comes to communication tools. Email announcements is going to be the one that I do strongly recommend is always granted to team coaches and managers so that you can send a general announcement. There are going to be areas in the system, if I have the ability to edit a practice, I'm going to be able to email about that practice being updated or added, regardless of my ability to send a general email announcement. The benefit of having this permission at the team level is that I can send general announcements as often as I'd like. They're going to be tracked in the system as emails that have been sent, that we can kind of review who received them and that type of thing. But it doesn't allow you to send that email announcement to anybody who is not part of your team, with the exception of other website administrators and the executive listing for the organization. So it's actually a really great idea to give coaches this ability so that they're using the Goalline system to send their emails. They can be tracked and reviewed in the system, and you can ask for them to maybe always copy the executive or always copy a specific executive from the list of executives when they're sending emails, as opposed to sending from their Gmail account or their Hotmail account, where none of that is happening inside the system. So it's a great permission to give out. It should also be noted that there are some permissions here that really are typically not granted to coaches and team managers at the team level. And some of them can be actually fairly problematic to give out. And so it's recommended, I recommend not to provide team coaches and managers with some of these permissions unless there's kind of a really good reason for it. In general, one of those is going to be the edit player or edit coach info displayed options. This allows the display on the public side of the website to be adjusted. And a lot of times, especially I would say most Goalline organizations are youth. And when it comes to youth, we don't want to display a whole lot of detail about youth participants on the public side of the website. So Goalline does want your roster to be displayed, but you as an organization may want to be in control of the details that are displayed. So if you want to only show first name, last name, and jersey number on your roster on the public side of your website, then you can set that all using the permission at the master menu level rather than at the team level. And that way everyone's just going to be getting the same player info displayed. There are times, though, if you have a team, if you have a really, high-level elite team that maybe you want to display more information about your players. Maybe you also want to show their position. Maybe you also want to show their hometown. For hockey or soccer, like what are they, left or right shot, that kind of stuff. You can choose to display additional details, and those details would only apply to your team. So if you do have that permission and it's reasonable for your association to grant you that kind of stuff, then you may have that permission as well. But just keep in mind that that may not be something that you have permission to do at your level as a team. And if you don't have permission to click on that button, then you would just have to ask your association if they would be willing to make that adjustment for you. Some other ones that are really important to keep note of are going to be edit schedule details. Edit schedule details has a lot of powerful configurations when it comes to how your schedule works and the date ranges that your schedule is available for. Your settings between individual statistics and just team scores and that kind of thing. Managing schedules, managing venues in particular. These are all things that typically are going to be done by the association as they prepare for the upcoming season. It is really rare that during a season you need to add a venue. If that venue is not already there, unless you have construction in your area and they're actually building new hockey rinks or new soccer fields, which good for you if you are. It's really important to keep that restricted. The one big problem that could come from having a permission to add venues, if you have venues in your system that are using nicknames, for example, I may not recognize that when you wrote in CHP that you meant Cole Harbour Place. And so I went and added Cole Harbour Place to the list of venues. And then I realized that, there's 2 rinks. So I'm going to say Cole Harbour Place Rink 1. And then in the system already, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm from Nova Scotia. I'm from Cole Harbour, Nova Scotia, and the Cole Harbour Place rinks are actually called Scotia 1 and Scotia 2. And so you could end up with a really weird variety of duplicate venues that you could schedule games and practices at that Goal Line's not going to recognize the conflict. But then when we have 7 teams showing up to Scotia 2 in the Cole Harbour Place because one's playing at Cole Harbour Place Rink 1 and the other one is playing at Scotia 1 and this, that, and the other, you'll end up with some potentially very expensive mistakes and conflicts with and double bookings with your venues. So really important not to allow permission to edit venues to people in the organization that aren't responsible for maintaining that list. They're always going to be able to select from the list of available venues. And so if the venue they're looking for is really, really missing, you can always reach out to an administrator with permission to make that update for you, to let them know that, hey, this venue is, not listed yet. So keep that in mind, because these are all permissions that are really important to keep under control. If the coaches are responsible for it, then definitely give them those permissions. But when it comes to, uploading schedule files and schedule details and venues, you could be setting up some scenarios that you may have some conflicts that the system doesn't recognize. So very important to keep those in mind. So those are generally the permissions. So I'll check off in a row here. So if I was setting up a coach, I want to give them the responsibility to manage their team. So I'm going to say that I want them to be able to create articles, to create email announcements, to add or remove files from their team menu. I want them to do their own photo gallery. I want them to send emails. I want them to view their roster, and I want them to be able to trade and claim venue time and report games. So these are the ones that, if I'm the association administrator, this is what I'm going to be granting to people to use. You may have noticed that I didn't talk at all about the little gray section here showing as password protected team pages. This is a feature that you can reach out to the Goal Line support team to have enabled for you. And what it does is allows you to create sort of you would create a website administrator that is actually a team, and you would set up that these particular items are, they require a password to see. And the use case here, the reason you might want to do this is if you don't want other people to be able to navigate to your goal line site and view your player stats and view your player roster, and maybe not view your coaching staff even, or not view your photo gallery, but maybe see just general game results and overall team stats. You might want these to be hidden from the general public, so that only the team that should have access to them, or maybe it's a general association thing that you do, that you have to have a password to view these things. In order to go to the public side of the website and view your schedule, I would actually have to have your team password in order to do that. So we don't have a specific webinar on password protected team pages. This works as well for league pages, so you can set this up for league and team pages. It's typically used just to what was the word that when I first started, they said they don't want people to go and do their espionage on your team and find out who your ringers are and whatnot. So if you don't want others to be able to view player stats without a password, then that's how you would use that feature there. So those are the permissions. We've gone through all of that. So if I'm creating my team administrators, and if this one person manages more than one team, I would just replicate that and check the same boxes for whatever teams are applicable to them. And then I would either save or create the user over here to update their permissions to make sure they have permission to do all of the things that they need to be able to do. So that's the permissions that we recommend. The next thing we'll talk about is if you have to manage your roster, and my screen is still really, really big. Let's make that a little smaller. Managing your roster, there's going to be a lot of different ways that organizations are going to choose to manage rosters. It's pretty common for this to be managed at the top level for that initial assigning of players to rosters. Various methods can accomplish that. Things like registration. I can pick a team when I'm registering, or maybe using assign multiple players, or a player import using a CSV file might be how those players got onto their teams. Players can be manually assigned, or they can be one at a time from the master menu, or assigned from a league menu. But regardless of how a roster is assigned, coaches and managers with the ability to view their team roster will at least be able to view the roster and adjust player positions and jersey numbers, and release players as needed. So if the permissions that we just talked about have been granted to the coach or the manager, then they should be able to make whatever necessary adjustments that they might need to do. If they have the add players permission, they'd be able to build their own roster from scratch, even if it wasn't in there already. So what if you have to do that? So let's add players to a roster manually from the coach's perspective. So we would be going to a team menu, and I'm just going to go, my computer's a little slow here today. It'll catch up, I swear. There we go. I'm going to go to my men's league today. I often use my women's hurricane league. I don't think you can see, but I have about 37 tabs open in another page there. So that might be what I might have to close some of that. Oh, sorry. I think my computer ran out of memory here. Sorry. All right. There we go. There we go. Okay. So I'm drilling down into a league and then to a team because I just want to be able to manage just one team roster. I want to see this from that perspective. So when we get into that league or that team menu, I can see my favorites as usual, but I can see team admin, email, website, schedule, and statistics. So team admin is where I'm going to go to manage my team. So if I want to add players, release players, manage the opposing teams if I need to do that, if that's part of my job as well. But in general, your association is going to take care of most of that part for you. I'm going to click add, edit, delete players and parents. If I don't have permission to add players, then I wouldn't have this screen available to enter over here. But if I do, then I'm going to see this over here, and then I'm going to see the actual roster that already exists over here. This is where I can edit a specific player, or I can release any players that I want to release from this team. This is just one at a time releasing a player. So Yogi Bear registered and he signed himself up on my team by accident. I can release him, or I can edit him and update the information there. So let's go ahead and edit our player here. So we've got a player. I can edit things in here as needed, including, you know, what kind of shot does he have? What position does he play? If I have rankings, if I'm going to use rankings, this is where I can do all of that fun stuff. I can set the position in here. I wanted to set that as goalie, actually. So I can set that in here. I can adjust any of the other information that's part of his profile as well. And then whenever I need to, I can go ahead and save the changes down at the bottom. So I've saved the change and I've made this person a goalie. So now I have the position is goalie for Yogi Bear. So when we're reporting our game stats later on, I'm going to know that he's the goalie. So I can do that for all of my players and adjust their jersey numbers and positions as I get those, and as we know what jersey number they're going to be wearing for the season. If I want to just add a player to the team, I'm just going to go back to my other tab here. If I want to add a player to my team, I can add by using first name, last name, and date of birth. Goalline always requires first name, last name, and date of birth for all participants, whether it's a coach or a ref or a player. So make sure that you do have those details handy. If you know that this player is already in the system, you're going to be able to just put in their first name, last name, date of birth, and we'll go down and we'll click add, and it's going to pop up and say, oh, hey, are you looking for this person? And you say yes, and it will add them to the team. If they are new, you'll probably want to include more than just first name, last name, and date of birth when you're adding them. You can always edit it later, but keep in mind that email address really should be included so that they're going to receive communications from you. So if I was to try to add myself, for example, I can add myself here. I think if I choose Jan 1 and 2000 here. So if I put in Amanda Velutini, January 1, 2000, and then I go down here and click to create this athlete, it's going to be looking up and say, oh, yeah, we already have somebody with that same name and date of birth. Is this the person that you want to add? I can say no, or I can say yes. And when I say yes, it's going to add Amanda Velutini to the roster that that we already were looking at. So as a team coach, I came in, I added Amanda Velutini to my roster, and it brought over all of the details that we already had about her profile. So any details that were included there, and so now I can just manage her like everybody else. So that's adding a player one at a time. If the player doesn't exist yet, then it's just going to create that player in the system with whatever details you provided, and then they won't necessarily receive an email right away. They won't receive an automatic email or anything, but they do now have an access code. And so as long as we have an email address, they're going to be able to retrieve their access code and access their own registration account and that type of thing. So if you were building your team kind of manually like that, one player at a time, you can do it that way. That's great for the one-off additions and changes that you need to make to a roster. If you have a whole list, you don't necessarily need to add them one at a time like that. You can choose to import players if you've been given permission to do so. A lot of times that's going to be done at the top level. So I'm just going to look for my import option here. Import. There we go. Oh, you know what? I think I lied. So upload or importing players is not available. Sorry, at the team level. It's available at the league level, but not the team level. I apologize. I did even write that down, and I just skipped that line. So with importing, it's something that can be done at the master menu or the league menu, and it's pretty common to do it that way. Even if you use registration, what will happen is people will register, and then they go and do their tryouts. Coaches then go and do their, they have their meetings and decide who's going to go on what team, or maybe you're doing team balancing and that kind of thing. So you end up with a spreadsheet of players, and you know what teams are going to be distributed onto. So your spreadsheet can be used at the master menu or the league level, but then at the team level, you'd be managing those changes kind of one at a time. There are other options for how to get your rosters in, and so roster edit is going to be one of those. Roster edit is available through the registration account, so that's something that you would access on the public side of the website. So if I wanted to, let me just go up here. If I log into my registration account, I have shopping cart tools enabled here, but as long as I have teams associated with myself here as a coach, I can click on registration info. Sorry, I thought I had one in that one, but I have lots of people in my registration account. So here is my my team here. I can't edit the roster at the moment because I think, yeah, it's been archived. But if I have a team, I can log in here and edit my roster. The really big benefit of this means I have no permissions whatsoever in the system as this person, but I can edit my roster because I went through a team registration form and you've given me permission to edit my roster because you've accepted my team, and it is going to be, I'm going to be held to the roster lock date that you have set. So if you set that the rosters have to be done by March 30th, then I have until then, and then I can't edit the roster anymore after that. You do require first name, last name, date of birth, and email address in order to use roster edit, and it will send an automatic email notification to players that they've been added to the team. You can also adjust jersey numbers and positions from there. So if for the coaches and managers that are on the webinar right now, this is something that maybe you're familiar with because you've used these tools. But if you're with an association that does team registration, if you're not familiar with roster edit, this might be something to really look into, because it prevents the idea of a coach or a team manager having to be created as a website administrator and be granted permissions that, not that I would say that they're problematic kind of permissions, but if there are any reasons for you to not want to add additional website administrators just for security and access and privacy things and that kind of thing, it is a good idea to use roster edit. It is required to use team registration, and you are able to continue to manage the teams in the back end in the exact same way. So the Purple Monkey Dishwasher team here, whatever roster was created when it was managed here is going to be in real time showing up exactly that same way when we're logged into the admin control panel and go to that team menu. I mentioned earlier that another method for players to get assigned to teams is going to be through individual registration. And that is something that the association would be setting up registration forums, and they would be deciding whether or not teams or players are allowed to pick a team at the time of registration. And in fact, they can set that they're allowed to. They can also set that they have to. The problem basically the only issue that could arise there is that if people don't see their team, they may select the wrong team from that list, in which case, based on the permissions that you've been granted as a coach, you can release that player from your team so that they can be assigned to the proper team. The roster display, so once you have your players in, then you have a roster that is going to display somewhere on the website. And so edit player info displayed. There's also edit coach info displayed, but edit player info displayed is kind of the more popular one to use. You could be impacting your public roster with information that may or may not be allowed to be displayed. Now I'm using a bad example, so I'm going to go into one of my rep teams over here just to see that a little differently. So edit player info displayed. Okay, because you'll notice here that there's a lot of information that could be displayed, and your association typically is going to have rules on what is going to want to be displayed. So your roster is going to be displayed in various places. The public website is one of them. The game sheet is going to be another. So your game sheet is a place where the roster is going to display. So whoever prints out that game sheet is going to have the first name, last name, and jersey number of the players that are on your roster. Whether you're a rep team or a league team, your team roster would be accessible publicly. So my website is it's a goal line website in a gold layout. So there's different ways that I might be navigating to get to my my men's team that we want to look at today. I'm going to go to my hockey division and I'm going to find my men's league. And from here, I can look at things related to the league. But now let's look at the team itself. So if I want to go look at Earth, I can see the schedule, but then now I can also see the player roster. And the player roster is going to show whatever edit player info display details are set to display. If you're doing individual player statistics, you're also going to be able to click on these names to view individual stats. And if there's any historical stats, it will show kind of that person's career stats. And this is one of the things, and I know we're not talking about schedules and seasons and things, but this is one of the reasons why it's always great to set up your leagues and teams and your seasons in a way that you use the same teams over and over and roll people up through their ranks. Because when I look at Amanda Velloutini on this site, I'm going to be able to see her historical stats for as long as she's been in the organization, regardless of what team she was part of. On the same token, I'm going to be able to go to the Earth team in the men's league and see what did that team look like in all of the years that the Earth team was part of the men's league, because Amanda wouldn't have been on that team every single time. So it's a really great way to start accumulating a really good amount of history on the website when you're collecting individual stats, and when you structure your leagues and teams the way that the scheduling webinar will outline is a good way to structure that. So your rosters will display here is obviously one place. The other place that we would see it is going to be in game results. So game results are going to be available for all kinds of different, at different levels. So depending on what level of statistic you decide to manage, you're going to be able to view game results. And those could be very detailed. So I'm just going to bring over one of our other sites over here. So this is one of our silver layout websites, and this is a live site. So when you're looking here, you're able to see the teams, and now I can go and look at the details of that game. And this is where we'll also see the player roster. So we see the jersey number and the first name and last name. We see their statistics. They're just kind of light hockey statistics for this particular one. But this is another area where your roster will be displayed once it exists on your site. So just keep in mind that rosters do display in multiple places. We'll go over to our go back into my men's league here. And we'll get a game sheet because this is another thing that you may have a responsibility for, is getting your game sheet out of the system. I suppose I should just let's go to Earth again. We'll look at this from the team perspective. So from my team menu, I would go to statistics. And with statistics, I'm going to be able to report a game score for whatever schedules are available. And so the schedules that are going to be available here are whatever schedules have games on them. So the regular season, there's a preseason, there might be playoffs, there might be exhibition, there could be any number of schedules available that have games on them. So my game that I want to report here, or that I want to print a game sheet for, is in my regular season. It is automatically displaying for me here, but if it didn't, I could change my date range so that I could, view games in a different date range or at a specific venue, or I can just click to search all the games in the whole schedule and see all of them. It is only going to show me games that involve my team, but it would show all of the games for the whole schedule, regardless of the date range. So this is where I would come in to report, or if I needed to set a forfeit or reset it. But this is also where I come to print the game sheet. So if I need to print the game sheet ahead of time, I'm going to do that. It will pop up for me. This is just some margin information, and it shows that game sheet. So it's going to have the game information, the game date, the home team, the visitor team, excuse me, and when I print this out, it's essentially the score sheet that a scorekeeper would use to indicate what's going on during the game. And this kind of mirrors a little bit of what that reporting screen is actually going to look like once we get into reporting the actual game scores. So we see lots of different areas where the roster is going to be displayed. So it is obviously something that you want to make sure is a correct roster. If there's somebody that needs to be released, they can be released from the team menu. If you don't have permission to do that, then you would just work with whoever your sort of coordinator or your administrator happens to be. I was going to talk about reporting game scores last, but because we're already here, let's do that right now, and we'll hop in and just take a look at what do we do to report a game score. So I'm going to click the report button, and it is important to keep in mind that you may or may not be allowed to report game scores, and it may be your responsibility, but it may be somebody else's. And so regardless of that, you're going to see all of your team's games if you have permission to report scores, even if it's not your job to report it. So if the rules are you report the games when you're the winning team, then all your games are going to show up, but you would only go in and click report if you won. And then the other most common, I would say, is if you're the home team. The home team is often the one that is responsible, but different sports in different areas might be a little bit different there. I'm just going to say empty net here so we can proceed here. But we have your goalies would be set up over here. Your roster players would be here. If you have coaches set up, those would be listed down here. And by default, we assume that all the players are going to be there. We don't assume that all the coaches are going to be there, but we do have we could set something up to do that. So you would set your coaches if they're listed to be here, and then once you're ready, you would submit your lineups. I'll just make a note here. If you do have suspensions, suspended players will be listed on the game sheet, but they will be listed as ineligible. And they're not, if they are suspended for a certain number of games. As you report games where they are listed as ineligible, it counts down their suspension for them. So if Yogi is suspended for 3 games, as I report the 3rd game, he's going to be no longer suspended for the following game. Once I submit my lineup, oh goodness gracious, I'm sorry about this. Okay, so that's a schedule detail setting, and this is another reason why it's important to keep that under control so that you don't have people making mistakes there. So let me just see here. So what was it I was doing? My points per period. I don't know. Points per period. Oh. We'll do 2, 0 off. Okay. So what I had done is I had certain rules set up on my whole site, but I had a couple of conflicting settings in here as far as the number, the duration and the length of the periods and things like that. So we're going to say that we're going to do 1 overtime period, and it'll just be 5 minutes. All right. Well, that was an unexpected little lesson. Okay. Okay. I would probably want to assign another goalie to that team as well. Oh, goodness gracious. I don't know what I have done here. I apologize, guys. Just give me a moment here and I will take a look at it from a different perspective here. All right. Okay. So when you're reporting scores, you're going to see the same screen. So we have our screen here. This one's already been submitted, so I'm just going to go straight over to the goals and penalties. So when you're reporting goals and penalties, this is for hockey. If it's soccer, then obviously penalties is going to be your cards, your cautions and red cards. If it's baseball, you're just not going to have that reference. So these are sport specific, and there may be a slightly different view depending on what sport you are. basketball and football, I think, for example, are just one page, but you go through kind of a similar thing where you're going to associate each player with whatever points are appropriate for them. So just keep in mind that your screen may be slightly different. My example being hockey is really just because it's a pretty much as complicated as your reporting could get. So as you're reporting scores, you would indicate who the scorer is. And then if it was assisted, you would indicate who assisted it. And you can do up to 2 assists. You would enter that it's a even strength, shorthanded power play, or penalty shot kind of goal, a normal goal. So is it a game tying, game winner, or normal goal? And then you would click to enter the goal. So this is when you're adding things one at a time. If you're doing live scoring while the game's actually happening, this is a great way to do it. It's also not a bad way to do it if you just like to be very meticulous and go through one at a time on the game sheets as you're kind of copying the game sheet. You would select what time of the game, or like what period or half you're in, and what time is on the clock when you are entering the goal as well, so that it's going to indicate that the goal happened at a specific time. The penalties are reported in the same way. So you select the radio button for the player who receives the penalty. You indicate what the infraction is, whether it's a minor or what type and that kind of thing, and then your number of minutes. Again, if you're soccer, this is going to be what type of infraction is it? Of course, what color card is it? And that may have implications with automatic suspensions. Red cards could potentially be an automatic suspension. So keep that in mind, that you want to make sure that you're always accurate with that. And that's one of the reasons why it's great to do these one at a time. So pick the player, pick what happened, enter the penalty or enter the card. You can do them all at once. So when you enter them all at once, you're just entering all the penalties, all the cards, and then all the goals. And when we say all, we mean all for both teams, not just your one team. So if you were going through only your team, you would not use all. You would do those one at a time. But if we were, assigning all goals, enter all goals, I would be entering everybody's goals all at the same time. And they're going to accumulate in the summary here to show us what was there. If there's anything that we missed, you can add it manually. So now that I've got all of this in, if I say, oh, you know what, Mateo also got a penalty, I can put that Mateo received a 2-minute minor for a high sticking or whatever makes sense, and enter that penalty. As you proceed through to the goalie stats, this could get more complex as well, because you can insert an additional goalie. If you have more than one goalie on your team, you can swap out your goalies. You can indicate what time did they leave, what time did they come in, how many shots did they get on them, did they win their time on the ice, or did they lose their time on the ice, regardless of whether or not the game was won. You can enter like a brand new, and you can reset these as well, but you can enter a new goalie here as well. So it indicates how many goals they let in on this screen based on what you entered on step 2. So you're not entering that Mateo, sorry, I'm using Mateo because that's my son, but you're not entering this goal on this goalie's stats page. You entered it over here. And because of what time we know that goalie was in and out of the net, we know whether or not, Quinton scored on this goalie versus scoring on another goalie if they happen to change. These guys obviously didn't, but over here there were one goal was scored against this goalie, and the other 2 goals were scored against this goalie. So your timing of your goals and penalties lined up with your timing of your goalies in and out allows you to have really accurate game reporting. If you don't see the ability to enter shots, that's something that we can enable for you at the on the support team. So we can enter those kind of things that allow for additional stats to display in your standings and on your team stats, things like your plus minus and shots and save percentage for goalies. Obviously, we cannot calculate a save percentage if we don't know how many shots there were, but not every organization wants to collect shots information. So if you want that turned on for you and you don't already see it, you can ask us about that. That, I believe, applies to soccer and hockey and ringette, but not necessarily for other sports. So that would be reporting a game score. And then once we get to the end, we're just going to indicate that the game is over. There's no more time left. And then here, if I'm responsible for this and I'm allowed, I can lock this game so that no one else can make any changes to it. If it's all, I can also unlock a game if I need to make any adjustments there. So reporting a game score, that's the complicated way to report a game score. But when you're talking about other sports, or you're just not dealing with individual player stats, which you definitely do not have to, you can report game scores with just a score, and that's part of your schedule details. So the organization or your league is typically going to tell you whether or not you're using individual stats or not. Sorry, goodness gracious, I can't get my schedule straight here. I thought I was using the right one. So I'm going to indicate that we're not tracking individual player stats here on my regular season schedule. You can turn that on and off. If you are using it, it is recommended to use it all season. If you're not using it, and you wanted to turn it on, it doesn't erase the game scores that have been reported without the stats, but it wouldn't have statistics to show you for the previous games. So when you're not tracking individual statistics, this is what your game report screen looks like. Much simpler. All you're going to do is indicate the score. If your schedule details assume that there's overtime and potentially shootouts, it's going to ask you, did it end in a shootout or not? And then again, based on your permission set, whether or not you can lock that game for future reporting. Entering a suspension is something you may be able to do as well. I can do that for sure because I'm set up as that type of administrator, but as a team level administrator, typically you don't enter suspensions. That's going to be somebody who has league level permissions or association wide permissions who's going to enter a suspension. So reporting game scores, as you do that, it's going to automatically do the rest of the sport math for you as far as calculating your standings and your rankings on the public side of the site for those regular season schedules. If it's a playoff schedule, it will still do that, but it's just going to update the next games, the next rounds of those games, or if there's more games in the series, if you have a best of 7 set up, it's going to start indicating that the series is now, tied 1-1, so that you can continue reporting the games in the series. So now let's talk about how do you communicate with your team. So I'm going to go to my rep team menu here again. Email is obviously one of the ways you're going to communicate a lot with your team. The team attendance tools that we mentioned earlier that we'll take a brief look at here, certainly one of the ways that your team will receive communications, but those aren't necessarily personalized. So you would go and if you want to send an email announcement, we'll click send email announcement. And it really is just enter the subject, enter the body, and then select your recipients. So your recipients, if you want players and parents to get it, are going to be the players and the parents. You may also want to send this to other entities within the organization, but you'll notice that it's really, it's a much smaller list than when you're doing this from the master menu. I mentioned earlier, you may want people to use this so that they can, email a very specific person, like always email my president or always email my communications director. Every time you're sending an email announcement over here. So that's one of the things that you can do. You'll see all your last 6 months worth of email announcements over here to just see who did you send that to and what was the content of that email. Another area to communicate is going to be news articles. News articles are very, very similar when it comes to getting the communication out, but this would also be displayed on the public side of the website as part of the team menu. So if you don't have that permission, I'll just show you on the public side. When I'm into a team menu, it would be in the team news section here, but only here. It wouldn't necessarily show up in the overall news for the rest of the association. So creating your news article, you'll see that you can also send this out to the same email recipients. But again, your team. So when I say players and parents, these are your team's players and parents, not the whole association, because you're doing this from your team menu and you may, again, select the appropriate additional executives. Hitting the wrong button there. I realize we're just getting right up at the end of time here. So I think I've only got just one let's see here. I've got a couple other things to look at here. So in your team admin section here, this is where you can set up team attendance. Team attendance is a really great tool to set up at the beginning of the season and just let it do its job. So edit team attendance settings lets you say, do I want this to send out automatically? Do I want you to be a question mark or in or out? And this is just, what do we assume when we send it to you? Generally, the question mark is the best way to go. You could get really forceful and say, we assume you're not coming. Or you could be very optimistic and say, we assume you are coming unless you tell us otherwise. You can allow players to make a comment, which is just a text line. And you can ask additional questions, which is where a lot of folks are using the area to do, COVID screening questions. You are only able to get one answer to the question, but if you phrase it appropriately, so if you, please answer, yes or no to all of the above. If you can't say yes to everything, say no. And then your frequency, so 0 being the day of the game. So a lot of times you'll see this set up as the day before and the day of the game or practice. And then I strongly encourage that you select to send it to both the first and second parent. This ensures that the player, parent 1 and parent 2 email addresses will receive this. It does only, you only need to answer it once. So once it's done, it doesn't have to be done by all 3 of these potentially different email addresses. This is just to make sure that, that they do receive it and that one way or another, you're getting the information. So once you save those options, that will start automatically going out based on when you have time, scheduled games and practices. And then you can review that team attendance information for any past game or practice by just looking at your review here. I didn't have any rosters or anything, but when you do have attendance information, you're able to export it to a CSV file as well, just so you can always keep that on hand. The last thing that I'm going to show you here is related to games and practices. You'll see that if you do have permission, you're going to be able to click add, edit, delete games. You'll be able to click add, edit, delete practices. The key is that these have to include, your team. So if you create a game, it has to be a game that involves your team, whether you're the home or away team. So you don't have to be the away team or the home team just to add it here. You could be the visiting team, and then you're playing at somebody else's venue and select the appropriate venue from here. You can add details to this as well that you can show publicly. If you have permission to do this, then I would generally recommend that as you create a game, especially if it's mid-season, that you do opt to use this very familiar now email announcement form to email your players and your parents and potentially others within the association. This search should be over on the other side there, because this is also where we would go if we have the ability to add or edit games. So if I need to edit a game that already exists, I can do that from this same tool. So add, edit, delete games lets me go and view any games that I might need to edit. So I can edit this game here. I'll point out that obviously we can edit anything we want as long as my rep team remains one of the teams. So maybe it's that we're home, not away, or I know who we're playing against now and we don't have to have that as TBA. Another good reason for coming in here to edit games is going to be to make the change to if the game is canceled or needs to be rescheduled or has been rained out. You'll notice that rain out is only going to be an option for outdoor sports. So it's not going to be an option for, what we consider rink sports or indoor sports. So if you don't see rain out here, then that's why you're not seeing that option. When you're in the statistics area where we were to report game scores, you can actually rain out multiple games. Typically, that's something that your league or your association would do, and not so much something that you as a team or coach manager would have to do. You wouldn't generally have more than one game in a day to rain out of your own. The reason we want to use these two is instead of just deleting a game that is not happening, is because you may or may not be also having referees assigned to your games using a goal line system, either directly in your site or through another site. And it is important to keep games in the system. You're not able to delete games that have referees assigned because that can interrupt the history and the reporting necessary for those referees. So using the canceled or the to be rescheduled options here essentially does the same thing as removing it. So it's canceling it so that we know that game's not actually happening. And the referees and the assigner, if there are any, would automatically be notified of the game cancellation or that it's going to be rescheduled and it's not happening as normal tonight. So that's a very important one to keep in mind. With practices, I think the only other thing that I'll note with practices is that you can create your own practices here, including recurring practices. Typically, recurring practices is something your association would do for you, and then you would go and make additional or make one-off edits to practices and say, you know, we're not able to make that particular practice, or you know, we're just if you need to add one practice or change the venue for one practice and that kind of thing. So that's something that you'll often be doing. I'm going to go to a different menu here because I think I had some practices that I wanted to show. Team admin scheduling. Yeah, so we've got a practice over here. So if I needed to, I can edit this practice and bring it over and just kind of change some of the details. Practices can be full venue, half, or shared or off venue. And just keep in mind that if something that's full venue, no one else can share that with you. Half venue, one other team can share with you. Shared venue, any number of teams. And so your association may have already set up shared practices. If it is already set as shared, you're not able to remove that kind of a setting. The other thing to note in here, and this is based on one of the permissions that we looked at earlier, is there is the option to offer the venue to another team. So if you have the trade or claim venue practice time option, then you would be able to offer this venue to another team. It would ask you to confirm. And then when you confirm that, every other coach on the system is going to get an email, not on the whole system, just in your site, is going to get an email saying that there is available practice time to claim. So there is an available practice time to claim. And if my team can make it, I can go ahead and try to claim that practice time. It confirms, are you sure you want to do this? I'm going to claim it. And now it's back. It's on my practice schedule again. So if I go into add delete practices now, we can see 2 practices on our schedule because I just claimed that. The benefit of using the trade and claim is that it's association. We can assume that your association has already been allocated that venue time and that you want to keep that venue time within the association. The association may be concerned with things like how many hours each individual team spends, not just on a venue, but in specific venues and at specific times of day and that kind of thing. All of the venue usage is going to be available to the association in the venue usage summaries so they can see by team or by venue in case they have to do things like shift around maybe team-based fees for the use of venues. So just keep that in mind that if you have those options, then you can certainly take advantage of them because your association already has that venue time available and hasn't been given back to like the city or whoever manages that in general. So those are the general tasks that you'll do as a team or team coach or manager. So we took a brief look at how do we set up those permissions, how do we add players to the roster, how can we manage that roster once it's in there, how do we communicate with our team, and how do we report games, and then if we're allowed to, how do we go ahead and add games or practices to the system. So all of these things as well. You'll notice that Goalline has a mobile app that you can download. It's a pretty light mobile app at the moment. It's to view games, to provide team attendance. There is a messaging component to it. Note that we are going to be launching a very exciting new mobile app sometime later in 2021. But for now, the team mobile app is a way for your team to kind of receive those kind of communications from you as a coach or team manager as well. So apologies that I went a little bit over. I've been doing really good the last 2 or 3 webinars. There is a question in the chat here that I'll try to address. How do you clean up old teams from previous years? So that question has more than one answer depending on where those old teams are. If you are a league, so let me go to my menu here. If I'm at the master menu and I see select a league control panel and we're talking about the teams that belong to one of these, teams, then the way I would typically do that is going to be through the season rollover process itself. One of the settings in season rollover, when you're managing your season, is to say, what do you want to do with the teams from last year? And if you're a league that takes registration or you're a tournament, you typically want to use the setting that says to remove previous active seasons teams from the system. I clicked on the absolute wrong thing there, so ignore me for now. Manage seasons, that's what I wanted to click on. So when you're creating seasons here, you create your season name, which should be very simple, 2020 or 2021, your date range. Check all whenever possible if that does work for you. And then here in the optional settings, remove the previous active seasons teams from the system. That's going to dump out all of the teams that were in the previous season so that the league stays where it is, so that the statistics and everything related to historical schedules in the league stay where they are, and are viewable by the public for that historical stuff that I mentioned earlier, but they're not going to be in your menu cluttering up your team list when you're trying to decide who's active in this current season. When I go to my women's league, I do have a lot of teams that I should probably clean up because I don't typically use that option. So if I go to manage teams from my league menu, I can see all these teams that I'm not really using. Some of these teams registered years ago. Some of them are just not participating anymore. So between the season rollover, doing that in bulk for you as you roll over all of your leagues, that's one way to do it. But if you're already in a current season, you can delete teams and delete multiple teams from the list. Just always make sure, of course, that you're not deleting the teams that really are current and active in the organization. So I hope that helps you out there. When it comes to deleting teams, you're never deleting the public archive of their historical statistics. So you do have that kind of peace of mind. You're also never deleting their team registration records or the records of registration or player records for the players who were on any of those teams. So all of this stuff, and I can go over to my public site and look at my women's league, for example. This is the one that I've been managing since about 2012, and I can go back and view the standings from all of these schedules all the way back to see what teams existed then. And there's a team called Reign. There's a team called Reign now. It may not be the same Reign team as it used to be, but it's, I can see what these standings would have looked like in any of my historical seasons. If there's any other questions, feel free to throw those into the chat. I'll stick around for a moment or so and just make sure if there are any questions that we can get those addressed. And if you have any further questions or any requests of our support team to enable or toggle things on and off for you, feel free to reach out to our support team and be on the lookout for another webinar invitation shortly. Thank you for coming, and thank you for spending just over an hour with me here, guys. Anytime you have suggestions for other webinar topics, don't forget to send those in to us as well, so that we can tailor something that meets your needs even better. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.